Very, very good morning to all of you joining in on Business Today Television. This is What's Hot, our latest offering that focuses on the truest buzz on the D Street as we have moved forward into the final week of 2025 and are at the cusp of 2026. The big question everybody is asking, where exactly will the money be made? The year of 2025 was unique in many ways and it set a lot of trends in many ways as well. The one such trend that we actually saw in 2025 was the record year in terms of IPOs, the initial public offers that came in and the unprecedented amount of funds that were raised via these new IPOs that came in. 1.75 lakh crore rupees, something that has never been seen in the years before. This is the kind of massive fundraise that took place via IPOs as well. So apart from this, we actually did see, the 103 companies that listed on Mainboard this time around. For SMEs also, this was a record year. 267 firms raised about 11,429 odd crore rupees as well. What exactly are we looking by the end of 2025? Of course, we had a strong listing buzz for most of the IPOs. 69 IPOs listed above the issue price, 33 IPOs listed below the issue price. Gains, however, have remained either similar or have faded towards the end of the year. So on this show, we are trying to go into delve deeper to find out how the trend of IPOs is going to be continuing in 2026. What do you do with the IPOs that you've invested in right now? And what do we look forward? So let's welcome our guest on board. Vinit Bolinjkar, one of the well-known market experts who joins us on a regular basis, is with us on this program. Warm welcome to you, sir, and thank you so much for taking the time out. Season's greetings to you for upcoming New Year and hope you have a fantastic one at that. We were talking about the IPOs. You've been one of our key guests who's spoken about most of the IPOs all through 2025. I want to kickstart by asking you, what surprised you in the IPO space in 2025 and what gave you an absolute shocker?
I think Misho's run was very, very good. And I think that is which really helped do well. And I think Tata Capital was one of the biggest disappointments in my opinion because very really hyped, did a lot in the grey market, and it just been a non-perform. So I think these two stand out as the brilliant and not so brilliant uh, events of the year as far as IPOs are concerned.
Absolutely. So, Vinitji, let's try and understand and decode the IPO space that has gone in. You did say the best performing one or the one that surprised you the most was Misho's huge run up and disappointed in Tata Capital. Right now, if you see, out of all the companies that got listed in 2025, 54 IPOs are still above the issue price. 47 IPOs have actually slipped below the IPO price, and therefore again the question comes up on the valuations that these companies come in, the initial hype that usually tends to fail or sustain even for big IPOs like you marked out for Tata Capital. So how does one really prepare themselves well, because we are already getting to a feeler that 2026 year will also be a year of the IPO rush and there could be an even higher record amount of fundraise that could take place in 2026. This is one space that attracts investors' attention the most. How would you explain what should be in the minds of people?
I think, see, you have to keep one thing in mind is that any new IPO that comes in, if you were to compare 10 years ago, is that they are very, very, very costly IPOs. So if you don't have a great business plan, then you're not going to see it see the light of day. Keeping that in mind, what happens is when you're playing for the IPO, you are rest assured that you are buying a good company, a sound business, which has got some credentials that wager a chance that you'll do well. I think the trouble comes when you are trying to find out what the valuation of the stock is going to be. And if you buy something very, very expensive, I think then you will not make money. But if you are very, very reasonable about the research that you do about what kind of returns, what kind of valuations the companies are coming at, then you can be rest assured that you will get a very reasonable listing gain or, a little bit of more action if there is good traction around the stocks.
Absolutely. Viniti, also let's actually look at what is important in identifying the IPOs. Should it be the massive hype? Should it be the parentage? Should it be the kind of opportunities in a sector that this IPO is coming into? What are the factors that you particularly advise clients to consider before choosing and selecting the IPO that you have to apply for?
So I think the host of factors. I think the first primary one is obviously the sector and the kind of market share that the company has. What are the opportunities around that? The third thing is when you're looking at the IPO, I would want investors to take a look at what the mutual funds are doing. What kind of pedigree is there of the funds that are buying into the stock in the wholesale market. And once you've got these figured out, the last thing to do is look at the valuation. And if the valuation is reasonable, then you already qualified the stock. And if the valuation meets your parameters, then that is the way you should be looking at buying into these stocks. Now, what happens is that you may not get listing because there is obviously the quota or how much you can get. But even if the valuation is, even if you don't get listing, you can obviously buy in the secondary market the moment it gets listed. A quite example of this would be your Prudential AMC, if you ICICI Prudential AMC, and if you see that it came up with a reasonable valuation, it had got a very strong pedigree. And when it listed also, it provided you with the opportunities to buy. So in case you did not get the IPO, you could still get into it on the listing date. So I hope that sums up for you.
Okay. Any key IPOs that you are going to be keeping on your radar for 2026, Vinitji? What are those IPOs going to be?
I think I'm going to keep a lookout for the Reliance IPO. I think that whenever it does happen, is going to be the one that I'll be watching most.
Reliance Jio, I think a lot of people would be watching out for that. But I think one aspect that a lot of viewers would try to understand from you is that how does one read into what happens in cases like a Lenskart? There was so much of debate that happened around the valuation of Lenskart right before the IPO hit the street. People questioned, the valuations and even the promoters purchasing just 3 months before the IPO was launched at a much lower valuation. Thereafter, the stock had a modest start, but then it picked up pace and yet again moved on. So the investors were not able to understand what really happened there. Were the valuations justified or were they not?
In retrospect, if you were to do the analysis of the IPO and the valuation that it was demanding, it is still looking to be overpriced. So unless the growth story really plays out in a very strong fashion, then I think we can say later that okay, the valuations were justified. But at this point in time, even if you put in the best of numbers around Lenskart, which you think are truly believable, for me it still looks to be overvalued.
Okay, fair point. Apart from the IPO space, of course, the other situation that we are also going to be discussing on the show is regards the small cap segment. Why are we discussing small caps, the other issue apart from the IPO space in 2025? For the small caps, this probably turned out to be the worst year since calendar year 2018. And we did see the index fall by about 23.5%. Now, this is another one space that attracts the investors' attention the most. It's the small retail investors that always look after the smaller stocks that are valued at a lesser price, have a lower ticket price, and therefore they get attracted with this. Remember, in calendar year 19, the small cap returns was minus 6.8%, but this was a sharp double-digit negative return that we actually saw in the year 2025. Despite the fact that the larger peers, Nifty managed a single high-digit return. The banking also outperformed in many ways, but it was the small caps that actually underperformed the index by a huge margin. Vinitji, what really happened here in 2025 for small caps?
So, there are a combination of factors. One is that, we saw a deluge of IPOs coming in and FIs selling. And we saw large cap and mid cap returns kind of, being suppressed. So all the, action actually shifted to the small caps. And here people went into for huge leverage. So, your margin funding, margin trading facility saw extraordinary build up in terms of leverage positions. And all these three factors in my combination, in my mind, along with the overvaluation that we have seen, caused that massive underperformance. I think two factors that you need to keep in mind is, if your valuations of mid cap are going to stretch equal to or at the same valuations as that of the larger mid cap, that is one point where, you should actually be a little bit cautious. Second is, you also need to time the, MTF space also. You need to track that also. That was one wild card which, people were not aware of. Now that you see that playing out, people will be tracking that also. So these are the two things that you must track in addition to the fundamentals that we look at.
Okay, right. Let me also just help all our viewers just understand the returns in terms of performance. When we look at Nifty, it managed a 10% return. The Sensex has managed an 8.8% return. And we've already got to know some of the reasons that Vinitji listed out as far as the reasons behind which small caps really underperformed this time around. What is the expectation going forward in 2026? Will this space rebound at all?
So let's look at three things. One, the big concern was how the market would share post the Trump tariffs. And we have crossed that hurdle of worries. In fact, the government has put in a large number of efforts to, diversify the concentration of exports to the US markets. So that one worry is taken care of. Second is valuations have corrected significantly. Third thing is that, our interest rates are very, very low, practically all-time lows. These were the rates which were prevalent during the time of COVID, and we saw a massive bull market play out, right, which went on for 3 to 4 years. Of course, there the slight twist that is coming is that the aggressive, commodity bull market that is playing out. So that can impact valuations a bit. It can hurt, it can hurt the valuation and the profitability also a bit. But, if you were to do a decent stock picking in this market, I think the three reasons that I highlighted for you is, one is the reasonable correction in the valuations, two is the liquidity that is ample in the system, and third is, we are still the best developed market and going very strong. So keeping all these things in mind, I think this year will play out much better. But I have this niggling worry that the US market might play, spoil the party initially. So, you need to be a little more balanced with your opinions and a little bit fleet-footed while you're, navigating this space.
Fantastic. Okay, let me also just help our viewers just get as to what are the broad analysts also thinking about this space. Bernstein has, of course, talked about further caution. They have exited the small and mid caps in January of 2025. They chose to hold on cash amid high valuations, and they also did not add any fresh stocks despite the mid cap upgrade. Now, of course, over 50% of the BSE 1000 stocks also turned red. Remember, 660 stocks delivered negative returns. Out of this space, BSE 1000 covers 94% of the total market cap, is what we have seen in this space. Some of the biggest losers that we actually saw in calendar year 2025 had names like Ola Electric, Tejas Networks, Praj Industries, Sterling and Wilson Solar, KNR Constructions, Newgen Software, Root Mobile, Whirlpool, there were declines of up to 60% in many of these stocks as well in this year, 2025. Out of all these names, does anyone resonate with you, Vinit, which could make a comeback at all, or is this still in a vulnerable zone?
I think Whirlpool looks good to me, to my mind. I think Whirlpool can bounce back. As far as the other stocks that we have mentioned, we have seen a little bit of a worry around the fundamentals as such. So look at Sterling Wilson; it did not play out to its prompted, potential. If you look at Ola Electric, they just did not do anything with regards to weekly numbers. So I think while these two stocks did not perform that well, or they were disappointed a lot, I think Whirlpool saw a lot of oversupply coming, but from the promoter. But I think that stock is still expected to do well. As far as KNR construction is concerned, I think they've been a little slow in adding order book. And Newgen Soft, I think it moved too fast, saw a lot of overvaluation, and we seen the stock correcting on that.
Okay, got that. Let me also just briefly talk about the sectoral trends that we saw in 2025. Some of the top performing sectors in this year have been PSU banks, metals, autos, financial services, and gains of anywhere between 10 to 20%, 23% were actually seen in these kind of sectors, whereas the top laggards were real estate and IT. Vinit ji, for the new year, which are the sectors that you believe are going to be in theme?
I think the chemical space is looking very, very interesting. We also like the FMCG space. We see them doing a very strong comeback, in spite of the fact that we've been really disappointed. So I think that these two spaces, and of course the energy space is going to do very well, and not to miss out on the commodity package. So these four spaces, in my opinion, continue to remain very strong, and we'll see them still continue the trend going ahead.
Okay, fantastic. All right, Vinny. Thank you so much then for being with us on the program and giving us a broad understanding of what to look forward to in 2026, the performances that we can expect from the IPO space, from the small cap space, as well as sectoral trends. Always a pleasure to have you with us, and hope you have a fantastic year ahead.
And wishing all the viewers a very happy new year.
Thank you so much, Vinit. 26,023 viewers on the Nifty. We're about 17 points lower in trade. So a muted start is what we have. Let's keep watching Business Today television as we track for you market moves throughout the course of the day. Stay tuned.